After America is made on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
On Sunday morning Australian time, there was another act of political violence in America. According to officials, it was likely an attempt on the life of Trump administration figures, possibly the president himself. If that's proven, it will have been the third assassination attempt in the life of this show. Though it was probably the least convincing, the gunman didn't even make it to the same floor as the president, conspiracy theories abound. But those conspiracies obscure a colder reality. In a country awash with guns, this kind of violence is normal, and it will almost certainly continue. On Wikipedia, the lists of mass shootings in the United States are so long they have to be divided up into decades. There were 17 in 2025 alone. Just over a week before this attack, 8 children were killed in a mass shooting in Shreveport, Louisiana. There is a separate page for school shootings. For 2025, that page lists 68.
This was an event dedicated to freedom of speech that was supposed to bring together members of both parties with members of the press. And in a certain way it did. But in light of this evening's events, I ask that all Americans recommit with their hearts in resolving our difference peacefully. We have to resolve our differences. I will say, you had Republicans, Democrats, independents, conservatives, liberals, and progressives. Those words are interchangeable, perhaps, but maybe they're not. But yet everybody in that room, big crowd, record-setting crowd, there was a record-setting group of people.
Much has been made of Trump's apparently reflective tone during the press conference he held straight after the event. But Trump's vague gestures towards peaceful resolutions don't mean anything. This is a president who, less than a month ago, threatened to wipe out an entire civilization. And in the days before the White House press correspondents' dinner, the Department of Justice adopted firing squads as a method of execution for those facing the death penalty. It also reauthorised the use of a single-drug lethal injection that had been discontinued during the Biden administration due to its potential for unnecessary pain and suffering. This event won't change anything about who Trump is or what he does. It certainly won't do anything to address the violence that has infused American politics since the very start. And it won't change anything about the way the mainstream media covers him. Joining us for the first time on the show this week is James West, the executive editor of independent media outlet Mother Jones. He's an Australian-born investigative journalist based in New York, where he's lived for 15 years. Recorded on Thursday the 23rd of April Australian time, before the Correspondents' dinner attack, we talked about the extreme volatility of American politics under this administration, whether real fractures between Trump and his MAGA base are emerging, and what this might all mean for the country ahead of the midterm elections. James, thank you so much for joining us on After America. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Hey, as I understand it, you've lived in the States for about 15 years now. So I imagine you've seen a few different versions of it. How much have things changed in the last few years?
It's a great question. I think things have changed a lot, but the same volatility and speed of American life is there, but it's sped up. I think that's how I think about it mainly, is the cycles that people are going through are getting speed run right now, not only by sort of the Trump administration's chaos, which is definitely real, their ability to break things every day, their ability to set the news on their own terms, his own chaos in decision-making. All of that is sort of aided by a few other things making this a unique time in America too. First one being that we spend so much time online, and the algorithmic incentive for all of these companies to keep the outrage going and to split us up into different audiences and for big influencers to kind of clout chase. All of that stuff is adding to this, pretty toxic, heady environment right now where it feels like anything is up for grabs. And then the other thing that's happening, I think, is that the media, the traditional media, the big TV shows, the big news shows, they're all consolidating and wondering who they are as well in the mix. So there's a real vacuum of trust going on right at the right time for somebody like Trump who can exploit that and weaponize it for his own chaotic means. So it's unique, but it's almost like somebody pressed Control B on the America that's always been there. It's a pretty fractious place. It's a pretty fast-moving place at the best of times, but somebody's come and they've sort of worked out how to manipulate that volatility for their own ends, really.
Yeah, and Trump is an absolute master of it, and it must be so difficult to grapple with, particularly in the media space, to not continually get sucked into that vortex. And you do spend a lot of time not being sucked in, I think, to that, reporting particularly on resistance to Trump and, what he's attempting to do on the ground, which I think doesn't get heaps of coverage, especially here, or I guess outside of the United States.
There are several No Kings protests planned across the country on Saturday as well. What are your thoughts on those?
What are they going? No kings?
No Kings.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved.
This is America's third No Kings protest, and it feels more charged than ever.
We demand justice for Renee Good and Alex Preddy. We demand justice for every single person who was hurt or traumatized.
The American people were lied to about the war in Vietnam. We were lied to about the war in Iraq. And we are being lied to today about the war in Iran.
The president said it's a bunch of radicals. You're damn right we've been radicalized. Radicalized by compassion, radicalized by decency, radicalized by due process, radicalized by democracy.
What's your sense of where that resistance is, what it's focused on, and probably an unfair question, but how effective it is?
I think we're finding the answer to each of these questions in real time. Actually, one of the big challenges of reporting on opposition to Trump is that it's emerging and changing really quickly on the ground. So your listeners in Australia obviously would have seen these big headline protests and movements, the No King movement, for example, take over streets, big banner style protests, some of the biggest in the nation's history, in fact. That is sort of the tip of the spear in some ways. But underneath that is this sort of roiling mass of different interests, different things that people are worried about. One of the things that we're tracking at the moment is opposition to data centers, for example. The big AI economy has forced these companies, not forced them, they're willingly going out there and purchasing big warehouses. And on the front lines of that expansion are ordinary people battling the takeover of their town, their electrical grid, and their water. And that's being sort of swirled in with kind of old school anti-war protests now that the Iran war is kicking in. And, say what you will about Trump and whether you believed him or not, but one of the things he told his voters is that he wasn't going to start any new wars of choice like this. And here we are. So underneath all of that is, as I said, this kind of swirling mass. And what we're finding is you can only really understand it if you go and talk to people and put a microphone in front of them and ask them what they're worried about. And, certainly there are themes of affordability. That's top of the list. Trump promised to bring prices down. They aren't. He promised no new wars. That's driving up prices at the pump. But there's other interests in there as well about preserving an American style of democracy and rule of law, of not going backwards on rights, immigration rights, gender rights, women's rights around abortion. But Trump's put jumper leads on all of these problems, and now the face of all of these problems. And so people are angry, and people, it's a historically unpopular president. right now. He's at an all-time low according to his own terms, but then in historic terms too, deeply unpopular. I saw a poll today, for example, Emma, that even 1 in 5 Republicans themselves are now starting to say the I word, impeachment. Now, that's why, caution every poll, of course. That seems like a pretty shocking thing to find in a poll, so let's take it with a grain of salt. But some of these things are starting to get teased out now, that some of these numbers are big, and they show, a bit of a groundswell of coalescing opposition to what's happening right now. Now, who's to say if it's durable or not? But I think the last couple of election cycles, including a vote last night, my time, which saw the Virginia state gerrymander referendum go through favorably for the Democrats, and that sort of positions the Democrats quite well for the midterms in comparison to the gerrymandering efforts that the Republicans have done. And that's sort of just one of about 2 dozen elections on a local level over the last 6 to 12 months that has shown a real directionality about the American public mind that is difficult to ignore at this point, I think.
Yeah, certainly. And I want to come back to the midterms. There's this tension, though, because Trump, obviously he cares deeply about being unpopular. Like, he wants to be liked. He wants everybody to adore him. But he doesn't care about democratic accountability, obviously. He's not worried about what these people on the ground think about or how what he's doing affects them. But then he does, of course, care about the base, like about the rusted on MAGA base, which, hasn't moved for a long time, has been all in on Trump. But a lot has been made, you mentioned, of course, the war on Iran. A lot has been made of the right-wing universe, like, breaking with Trump, particularly over the war. I'm thinking, obviously, of people like Tucker Carlson.
We'll be tormented by it for a long time. I will be. And I want to say I'm sorry for misleading people, and it was not intentional. That's all I'll say.
Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, I have to ask you if you believe that the president thought he was depicting himself as a doctor, not Jesus, in that post.
No, absolutely not. I thought that was blasphemy. As a Christian, I was very offended.
What's your sense of where the base is at? Like, can we talk about the base fracturing, or is that overblown?
I think we can start talking about the base fracturing, actually. I think what's happening right now is some of these top influencers on the far right. You mentioned Tucker Carlson. Of course, there's Candace Owens. There's Marjorie Taylor Greene, who used to be a top ally of the president, now split off and is a real vocal person trying to pick this sort of anti-Trump lane. And who owns MAGA has now become a live question for a lot of these very influential people on the far right. And those people, I think, like Tucker Carlson, are not interesting necessarily for what they say, although it's sort of interesting. Sometimes, Tucker obviously came out recently and said that he was torn up by supporting Donald Trump. I mean, you need to take these people with more than a grain of salt. But what's interesting is they are identifying audiences for that. They wouldn't be doing this unless there was a market for that idea. And so one of Tucker's great sort of dark arts, I think, is being able to diagnose where particularly right-wing listeners, viewers are headed and be there before them. And, someone like Candace Owens is sort of a bit crazier than that even. But no less symptomatic, I think, of a move to try to claim ownership of this so-called America First lane in a post-Trump world. Now, who knows when Trump will vacate that top spot. But if those people are preparing for that, now that's worthy of reporting and worthy of taking seriously, I think. And it's not for nothing. It's really interesting now when you log into X, formerly Twitter, and
I generally try to avoid doing that.
Well, exactly. It's a workplace hazard for me. But when you log in, this machine that was originally built to amplify MAGA and Trump after Elon Musk took it over and changed it from Twitter to X, is now in the unfortunate position, depending on who you are, of amplifying the fractures of MAGA, because so many of those people that are benefiting from the amplification are now suddenly finding themselves to be anti-Trump. So some of these things can work in an interesting way and quite quickly, back to my first point, that I think people are seeing each other on these platforms, taking cues from these influencers, and suddenly there's a movement in one direction. And that's not to say it won't change back in 3 or 4 weeks' time, depending on what happens. But this break, Emma, I have to say, really feels like more major than any of the other breaks, because it's coming from within the house for Trump. Formerly, the breaks with Trump happened sort of because establishment Republicans got sick of it after a while, or they quit, or they were forced out, or Trump forced them out, or whatever. But this is coming from, previously quite rabid supporters of the president. And that's, you can tell that he takes it seriously, because he is posting Truth Social posts about it and calling them low IQ and terrible ratings on TV, which I guess happens to be his worst insult. If you're bad on TV. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's always been true, or we've always suspected it was true, James, that the movement would jettison him if it became evident that he was no longer useful. He's never been of the movement. He was kind of retrofitted onto, I'm talking about here, the kind of broader, longer term conservative political movement in the United States, but he's been incredibly useful to that movement in giving it the executive, Congress, the Supreme Court, and they won't let go of that easily. But it does seem like they can see the potential for it slipping away given what Trump is doing. And that is partly because the midterms are looming, the November congressional elections are looming, and in what we might describe as a normal political cycle, Trump and the Republicans would clearly be heading for a wipeout for all of the reasons that you've just outlined. Like, the polling is very clear. We could expect Democrats to win back the House, potentially even the Senate. That's how bad numbers are. But it's also true at the same time that none of this is normal. We're not it's not a normal administration. We're not in normal political times. It's absolutely not a fair question. But what's your sense of where the midterms are at? Given the polling, given the fracturing of the base that we're talking about, but also given what the Trump administration is doing to undermine faith in elections and the actual integrity of the democratic process?
I mean, it's a great question, Emma. And if I sort of had a crystal ball, I would have smashed it on the ground a million years ago when it came to American politics in particular, because it has a real chance of just surprising everyone, right? So having disclaimed that part, I think what I can say is that I've never quite seen a groundswell happen in this way, and in this sort of connected way. And I think about a place like Minneapolis, for example, where, a city was besieged by a federal takeover of ICE, and it was brutal and violent. And the people there almost formed what could be described as a kind of political popular front, both conservatives, liberals, progressives, right across the political spectrum, that taught each other how to resist federal overreach, and has become a model for, quote unquote resistance. I mean, I think the word resistance can sometimes be a bit overused, because I think it's a number of different things all at once that happens to be grouped as sort of opposition politics. But Minneapolis was a great example that if it gets bad enough, people are recognizing how bad it gets, and the sort of overreach and extremity of Trump's policies that, we should admit he was elected in fairly on, and has in his mind at least, has a mandate to execute on. The overreach is the problem. And, communities have really bound together, not only on that issue, but on all sorts of issues around the country in a way that I don't think really did happen in the first administration in the same way. This feels, at least from our reporting and from being on the ground myself, the way people are talking about it is sort of different. It's hard to describe, but I think because it's happening in real time, we don't quite know yet the size and shape of it until a big election comes along, at which time you get to kind of take a big national temperature check. But, I think all my 15 years here, I've seen many different seasons of American politics, and certainly this one feels like both the most volatile, but also people are preparing for opposition in a way that they haven't before.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and of course you're right to put the caveat in place. I mean, November is like a political eternity away. Exactly as you say. Who knows?
Particularly because these news cycles are moving so quickly. Like you think about even when the march to war against Iraq began, right? Like there was a campaign of messaging that led up to that, for better or worse, and worse, in my opinion, ended up with, the world going to war. And you think about the kind of actions that the Trump administration has taken with regards to Iran, it's happened astonishingly quickly.
Yeah.
Like just so quickly that I think Americans themselves are in shock about it and don't know how to think about it. It wasn't explained to them. They see the negative reactions to it. Trump's voters may be in fact willing to go along with him if he had explained it as thoroughly as previous presidents had, no matter what you think about their military misadventures. This one, just the speed at which American life is moving right now, it's very little ability to put it all into one narrative apart from Trump's own craziness,
Yeah, which gives us all whiplash.
Yeah.
You mentioned the rest of the world there, James, and so I wanted to, I hope you'll let me be a little bit parochial.
Of course.
Given where you grew up, we talk a lot on the show about Australia's relationship with the United States and this idea of a shared history and particularly shared values. And, I would always argue that the real substance of that relationship, where we can talk about shared values, if we can at all, I think it's a big if, but the real substance of that is not in the kind of high level like military capital A alliance stuff. It's with real people and real connections, people like you who've gone to the States and are reporting on American politics, and are building, real relationships. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, like, from that perspective, what is your sense of Australia's relationship with America?
I think a lot about this, Emma, because I've had a really amazing experience in America as an Australian. I mean, specifically as an Australian, I think. Americans are wonderfully open people to outsiders, and that sounds like a weird thing to say given the political environment right now, but I would hazard that a plurality of Americans really are extremely open to new ideas. That's sort of bit cheesy to say maybe, but that American sense of entrepreneurialism and innovation is real. Like, I work with incredibly enterprising reporters every day, and they are ambitious. They want to change the world. They are super smart. They're talented. They come straight from universities that are best in the world. They are tackling complex and interesting problems and trying to make the world a better place. Like, that's the America that I live in. And that's not simply because of where I work, but I think that is an experience of America that I think is common, actually. And not to be too Pollyanna-ish about America, because I think it has a deep bench of problems that we've just been talking about and that you feature on your show. And you have to be wise to them, and you have to be sober about them, and you have to really treat America as the heavyweight in the room when you're reporting on what they do, which is what I think your show does well. It's treating it on the terms that it needs to be treated, right? Like, it is a superpower. But on a human-to-human level, I joke that my accent opens doors when I talk to people here. They're extremely curious about why I ended up here and what the hell I'm doing when there's a beach I could be on in Sydney, where I'm from. And, that I think they think of Australia as this sort of mini eccentric version of them, in a way. It's sort of similar enough, but different enough to be a kind of extension of America in some ways. It helps that a lot of Australian shows are on Netflix and American television too. There's a huge fan base for huge might be overstepping it, but large fan base for people who like Australian cultural exports right now. And so, half the actors on television in America are Australians, who are setting themselves up in LA for acting careers. And so I think there's always been a affection and a trade of ideas and an openness to Australians. And the only times I've ever encountered, xenophobia or anything sort of approaching that has been when I've been in my role as a journalist, actually, and been having to do slightly antagonistic things or confronting sort of power in that way. Then it can be a little like, what are you doing here? Actually. But aside from that, the change in the last year and a half with the scale up of immigration threats, I think, has chilled, I think rightfully, a lot of Australians' views of how open America as the sort of political identity is. And fair enough. Immigrating here is hard. It's scary. People in charge of border control, and I've had many interactions with them, are scary. That's a reality on the ground. And they have an enormous amount of relatively unchecked power, even compared to a local police force. And so that aspect is getting scarier. And I talk about that with my Australian friends all the time. Like, what are we worried about on that front? How do we protect ourselves? I've got an immigration attorney who can step me through things, and a very supportive workplace that would kick into gear should anything happen along those lines. So I feel safe, and certainly being Australian and white helps me out on that front too. That's a privilege that I have that other immigrants here do not. But immigration security here as an Australian, I think, has certainly evolved over the time I've been here, and it does feel a bit more precarious than it used to. 100%. I also have a criminal record here. Just confess to your listeners that during a reporting assignment, I was thrown in jail for allegedly trespassing near a private prison in deep rural Louisiana. And so that sort of haunts my immigration in a way. It's now been dealt with. But, those things happen when you're reporting in America. It is a much more, again, I keep coming back to that word volatile, right? It's a much more volatile place for the kind of work that I'm attracted to doing, and the type of change I want to help facilitate with journalism. It's just a bigger, more fractured, more volatile place for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Things are changing so quickly, and it's hard to believe, but it does seem like that volatility is increasing every day. So thank you so much for your time and your generosity in taking us through it so clearly. We just appreciate it so much, and really hope we might be able to have you back on the show.
Yeah, maybe when the midterms are heating up and we've got people all around the country reporting on the ground, we can kick up an update for you.
That would be amazing. Thanks again, James.
No worries. Great to talk to you.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. The latest Vantage Point essay from Australia Institute Press is available for pre-order now. In Rich Kid, Poor Kid, The Battle for Public Education, best-selling author and Walkley Award-winning journalist Jane Caro examines the origins of Australia's public education crisis. In the essay, Caro lays bare decades of poor policy choices and outlines what governments can do to create the public education system Australians deserve. Available for $19.95, Pod listeners can get free shipping by using the code PODVP, that's PODVP, at checkout. Visit australiainstitute.org.au/store to pre-order now. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Thursday the 23rd of April, Australian time. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.